The Germans feared the Russians. They respected the British. But when it came to the Americans, they were contemptuous. At least at first. Wehrmacht veterans consistently described the Americans as amateurs. Loud, wasteful, undisciplined. Men who had never known real war, playing soldier in someone else's conflict. One captured German officer called them enthusiastic amateurs with a disposition to aggression I'd never seen in any other nation's sons. He meant it as an insult.
But here's a better question than what did the Germans think of American soldiers? It is this. Why, by the end of the war, did veterans of the Eastern Front, men who had survived Stalingrad and Kursk, quietly admit they were glad they'd surrendered to the Americans rather than face them in the field one more day? The answer is not what most people expect, and it has almost nothing to do with individual fighting ability.
To understand the German miscalculation, you have to go back to February 1943. The place is Kasserine Pass, a narrow gap in the Atlas Mountains of Tunisia. It is the first major clash between the Wehrmacht and the United States Army. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the most feared German commander on any front, strikes the American Second Corps with devastating force. American units, spread thinly across wide fronts and lacking effective coordination, are hit by fast-moving combined arms attacks supported by artillery and air power. When Rommel's forces sweep through the pass, American units disintegrate with surprising speed, abandoning equipment and positions in what veteran German soldiers regard as a rout.
The German High Command draws a clear conclusion. The Americans are soft, inexperienced, unready for total war. It is a conclusion that will cost Germany everything. Because what happens next is the part no one talks about. The American response to Kasserine is swift and, ultimately, highly effective. Eisenhower moves within days to replace the ineffective Second Corps commander with General George S. Patton, who arrives at headquarters on March 6, 1943, and immediately transforms the command atmosphere. Within 3 weeks, the same American soldiers who had fled through Kasserine stand their ground at El Guitar and stop a German armored assault cold. The amateurs are learning, and they are learning at a speed the Wehrmacht has never encountered before. Here is what the Germans fundamentally misread.
The Americans do not fight like a professional army that is trained for decades. They fight like an industrial civilization that has decided to industrialize war itself. Germany's artillery shortages are so severe that the Wehrmacht seems to employ nearly every gun that comes into its possession. Half of the Wehrmacht's artillery pieces on the Eastern Front are French guns. General Hans Eberbach, commanding 5th Panzer Army against the British in Normandy, writes that his artillery includes guns from every major power in Europe. Acquiring the proper ammunition, the firing tables, and the equipment needed to keep these guns operational is a logistical nightmare. American artillery is the opposite. Standardized, plentiful, devastatingly coordinated. American artillery is more mobile, larger caliber, longer ranged, better supplied, and once proximity fuses are approved for use in Europe, utterly devastating. The proximity fuse, a shell that detonates automatically at the optimal height above a target, shredding everything below it with shrapnel, is deliberately withheld from the European theater for 2 years out of fear the technology might fall into German hands. When it finally deploys in late 1944, it breaks German infantry formations with a lethality that veterans describe as unlike anything they have experienced. The greatest fear of Wehrmacht soldiers when confronting the Americans? The crackle of a walkie-talkie. It means overwhelming artillery is about to rain death on them with inexhaustible and accurate shells.
That word, inexhaustible, is what keeps appearing in German accounts. Not accurate, not powerful, inexhaustible. Because the real terror of fighting the Americans is not any single weapon. It is the realization, creeping and then catastrophic, that there is no bottom to what America can produce. When German commanders capture American supply dumps in North Africa, they are stunned into silence. They had expected to find what their own men carried: carefully rationed ammunition, limited fuel, equipment worn thin by scarcity. Instead, they find mountains. Mountains of shells, food, vehicle parts, fuel cans, replacement gear. German generals are stunned by the huge piles of supplies captured and try to hide their reaction behind bravado. But the bravado does not last long, because the Americans simply resupply and keep coming.
One German officer, watching American forces during the Battle of the Bulge, observes German artillerymen using carefully calculated fire plans, every shell accounted for, every round a calculated risk. He looks across the line and sees American forces casually stacking 155mm artillery shells by the side of a road, left behind in a retreat as if they are not worth the effort to carry. He understands, in that moment, that Germany cannot win this war. Not against this. The Americans produce a host of superb aircraft, radar equipment, the proximity fuse, the DUKW amphibious vehicle, the Jeep, and still field their tanks in numbers that dwarf anything the Wehrmacht can manage. The M4 Sherman is, tank for tank, inferior to the German Panther. German crews know it, American crews know it too. But for every Sherman that burns, 3 more appear on the horizon. The Germans have no answer to that arithmetic. By 1944, the Wehrmacht's veterans are exhausted in a way that goes beyond physical fatigue. They have spent years fighting the Soviets, an enemy of staggering resilience, capable of absorbing losses that would have shattered any European army. Many of the commanders Patton meets in France have participated in the retaking of Kharkov and the subsequent Battle of Kursk, the largest tank battle in history, which results in irreplaceable German losses of material. These are men who understand attritional war, men who have stared into the abyss of it. And then they face the Americans, who are not fighting the same war of attrition, who are fighting a war of replacement, where every loss is instantly filled, every gap in the line instantly plugged, every failed offensive instantly restocked and retried. When asked if the Americans were feared, a captured German veteran would only say that he was glad he was able to surrender to them instead. That sentence contains the entire story.
The real reason the Wehrmacht hated fighting Americans is not that American soldiers were the finest individual fighters of the Second World War. They were not. The Germans were tactically superior at almost every level for most of the conflict. Better trained at the squad level, more experienced at the operational level, more flexible in the face of chaos. But the Americans had understood something about modern war that the Wehrmacht, for all its tactical brilliance, never fully grasped. That victory in industrial age conflict is not decided by the soldier who fights the hardest. It is decided by the nation that can replace the fastest. The Germans feared an enemy they could never defeat with a rifle or a tank or a brilliant flanking maneuver. They feared the factory. They feared the logistics chain. They feared the crackle of that walkie-talkie, not because of what it meant for the next 5 minutes, but because of what it meant for the next 5 months.
In the end, you cannot outfight a nation that can afford to lose and keep going. And by 1945, every man in the Wehrmacht knew it.